It was my 21st birthday, when the chandelier light dimmed over the Cross estate, the waves outside pounding against the Charleston shore. 300 guests held their breath as my father Magnus Cross, the man who built a 90 million empire, lifted his glass and smiled with the kind of cruelty only a king can afford. To Adrian, he declared, his voice echoing through marble halls, "The rightful heir, the son who carries my blood and my fire." Then his eyes locked on me. And to Nathaniel, a mistake that should never have existed. The applause erupted like thunder, but it wasn't for me. Before I continue, let me pause. If you've ever stood in a room and felt invisible, or worse, humiliated, you'll understand why I need to tell this story. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my place? And let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far my mother's truth will travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this journey. My name is Nathaniel Cross. I was born into the kind of wealth that should have promised me comfort, yet I spent most of my life as an afterthought in my own family. While Adrian was groomed for greatness, I was the shadow, the one people politely ignored. On paper, I was the son of a real estate mogul. In reality, I was an intruder in my father's kingdom. That night was supposed to be a celebration, a moment when I might finally be seen. Instead, it became my public execution. Magnus didn't just choose Adrian. He erased me with one sentence. The air in the ballroom thickened, filled with whispers sharp enough to cut. Some guests pitied me. Most smiled glad to witness a downfall that wasn't theirs. I remember the weight of the champagne flute in my hand. It suddenly felt like stone. Across the room, Adrian grinned in his tailored Versace suit, soaking in the admiration, the applause, the destiny that had always been his. Then came the sound that split me open, the metallic jingle of keys. My father tossed Adrian the ownership of a private jet like it was nothing more than a toy. And Clara, my fiancée, she was standing beside me, her hand trembling in mine. For a heartbeat, I thought she would stay. But when Adrian caught those keys, when the crowd roared, she slipped away. I heard the faint click of metal against marble as she pulled the engagement ring from her finger. She didn't look back when she walked across the ballroom and congratulated my brother. I stood there, surrounded by glittering wealth chandeliers and strangers who knew my name, but not my worth. 300 witnesses to my collapse. My birthday had turned into a coronation, just not mine. And as the waves outside crashed harder against the shore, I realized something. Sometimes a man is buried alive, not by dirt, but by silence, by shame, by the people who should have loved him most. The sound of Clara's heels clicking away still echoed in my chest when the ballroom erupted again. Applause rolled across the marble like a storm at sea. All eyes turned toward Adrian. My brother, the golden heir in his spotless Versace suit, grinning as if he'd rehearsed this coronation since birth. He basked in the glow while I stood in its shadow, the mistake left behind. Then came the moment that sealed it. My father Magnus reached into his pocket with a flourish. A hush fell, the kind that always comes before a grand performance. His hand emerged holding a set of polished keys, their silver teeth glittering beneath the chandelier. "Your first conquest," he announced. "The Cross family jet. It's yours now, Adrian." The crowd gasped with delight, as though witnessing history. Magnus tossed the keys high an arc so perfect it felt choreographed. Adrian caught them effortlessly, raising them overhead like a trophy. The room roared. Strangers clapped him on the back. Old friends embraced him. Even the men who once lectured me in classrooms, professors who had praised my mind, were there, congratulating him as if I had never existed. I watched my world disassemble piece by piece, each cheer a nail driven into my silence. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was currency traded openly in that hall. Every smile toward Adrian felt like a knife turned against me. And then Lucas moved. Lucas, my only real friend, the one who had grown up alongside me before money and bloodlines divided our paths. He stepped into the center of the ballroom, his voice trembling but firm. "This isn't right," he said, pointing toward me. "Nathaniel has given more to this family than you admit. He deserves to be recognized tonight." The music faltered. Conversations died. For a fleeting moment, I thought someone else had seen me, really seen me. But before the thought could steady me, two of my father's security men closed in. "Step aside," one growled. Lucas refused, planting himself between me and the sneering faces around us. What happened next was fast, brutal, and unforgettable. They shoved him hard. His body slammed against the polished floor, the crack echoing louder than any applause. Gasps rippled through the guests, but no one stepped forward. No one helped him. My friend lay there humiliated because he dared to speak my name with respect. I knelt beside him, ignoring the whispers, reckless, desperate, pathetic. Lucas gritted his teeth, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "They can erase me, but not you. Remember that." I helped him to his feet, both of us shaking, though for different reasons. He bore the bruise on his body. I carried the bruise on my soul. As I steadied him, I caught sight of Adrian in the corner, laughing with Clara, his hand already resting on her back, as though she had always belonged there. The night pressed down heavier than ever. I wasn't just the forgotten son. I was the spectacle, the lesson of what happens when you don't fit the mold. My birthday had become theater, my shame the entertainment. And as Lucas limped beside me out of the circle of light, I felt the truth settle deep inside. They had buried me in front of 300 witnesses. What none of them knew, what not even I fully realized yet, was that you can bury a man alive, but sometimes in the darkness roots take hold. The roar of celebration behind me faded into a muffled hum as I pushed open the glass doors and stepped into the night air. The Cross Estate gardens stretched wide, lit by lanterns swaying gently in the coastal breeze. I should have felt relief to be away from the suffocating crowd, but the humiliation clung to me like smoke. Every cheer for Adrian, every whisper about the mistake still rang in my ears. I wandered toward the fountain at the center of the garden, the marble angel poised as if frozen in prayer. My reflection stared back at me from the water shoulders, bent tie undone, eyes hollow. For a moment I wondered if this was the man my father always saw, weak, unwanted, forgettable. That's when I noticed her. A woman stood beneath the arch of ivy, her silhouette carved by moonlight. She wasn't one of the party guests I would have remembered her. She carried herself with a calm certainty, as though she had been waiting all evening for me to appear. Her coat shimmered faintly midnight blue cashmere, the kind of garment that whispered old money and older secrets. "Nathaniel Cross." She said, her voice low but steady, each syllable deliberate. Hearing my name from her lips was like hearing it for the first time that night, not as an insult, but as something worth saying. I swallowed hard. "If you're here for the party, you've chosen the wrong son. The winner is inside polishing his crown." She didn't smile. Instead, she reached into her coat and drew out a small wooden box. Its surface darkened with age, sealed with a stamp of crimson wax. The emblem pressed into it, a hawk in flight, was unfamiliar, yet stirred something deep inside me. "Your mother asked me to deliver this to you on your 21st birthday. the woman said. She knew this night would come. My chest tightened. My mother, Isabella Cross, had been gone for 10 years. Cancer had taken her swiftly, leaving me with only fragments of memory, the smell of her perfume, the warmth of her hand, the quiet strength in her gaze. And now, here was a piece of her, waiting for me in the dark. "Who are you?" My voice cracked, unsteady. "Evelyn Harrow," she replied, stepping closer so the lantern light caught her face. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, but not unkind. "I was Isabella's confidant and her attorney. More importantly, I am her blood. Your mother was born Isabella Harrow. The Cross Empire is not the only legacy you carry." Her words cut through me. I had spent years believing my life was defined by my father's contempt, by Adrian's shadow. Yet here in my hands was something different, something older, heavier, maybe even truer. The wooden box felt warm, as if it had been waiting for me. Evelyn's gaze lingered, searching mine for something, courage perhaps. Inside, she said softly, "Is the truth about who you are. And the beginning of a war your father never wanted you to fight." The garden grew still. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. For the first time that night, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what had been hidden. The wooden box trembled slightly in my hands, though I wasn't sure if it was the night breeze or the weight of what it carried. Evelyn's eyes told me this wasn't a gift, it was a reckoning. I broke the red wax seal with my thumb. The snap of it seemed louder than the music still drifting faintly from the ballroom. Inside lay 3 things. The first was a letter folded with the precision of someone who knew this moment would matter. My name was written on the envelope in the delicate hand I remembered from childhood notes, tucked into lunch boxes, Nathaniel. For the first time that night, my knees weakened, not from shame, but from memory. I unfolded it slowly, each crease releasing the faintest trace of her perfume. My mother's words seemed to lift from the page, steady and deliberate. "My dearest son, if you are holding this, then Magnus has done what I always feared: he would erase you in front of the world. But you must understand, Nathaniel the Cross, fortune, is not your true inheritance. It belongs to another name, another bloodline, Harrow. Everything he claims as his was built on foundations that were never his to own." Her handwriting grew firmer, almost defiant. "Within this box is a key, the Harrow estate. It is more than land. It is the seat of our family's legacy. Magnus married into it. He used it. But he never owned it. You are the heir. You are the blood." I pulled out the second item, a small golden key, heavy despite its size, engraved with the words, "Harrow Estate." It shimmered under the lantern light like a promise my father had tried to bury but couldn't destroy. Beneath it rested a USB drive, sleek and unassuming. My mother's note explained it held contracts, patents, deeds, legal proof that the wealth Magnus paraded as his own had roots in the Harrow lineage. My mother had catalogued everything, preparing for the day when truth would matter more than silence. But it was the last item that cut me deepest, a photograph yellowed at the edges of Magnus, decades younger, standing arm in arm with a woman I didn't recognize. Her smile was radiant, but the intimacy between them was undeniable. The back of the photo bore a date, scrawled in faded ink. The year my parents' marriage had nearly broken apart. Evelyn's gaze lingered on the picture as I held it. "Your mother knew," she said quietly. She didn't confront him because she chose to protect you instead, but she kept the evidence. She wanted you to understand the whole truth, not just about the empire, but about the man who belittled you. The garden around me blurred lantern light, bending through the sting in my eyes. My father had built his kingdom on betrayal not only of me, but of her. And my mother, quiet and patient, had built her defense in silence. I closed the box, my pulse steady for the first time that night. Inside, I no longer saw remnants of the past. I saw weapons, truths sharper than any blade, the kind of truths that could end a dynasty. I left the garden with the wooden box pressed tight against my chest, its weight heavier than the humiliation I had carried all night. Inside it lay more than memories. It held a map to a different future, one my father never wanted me to find. I knew I couldn't face what came next alone. And so the next morning, as the Charleston sun rose over the harbor, I drove to a modest brick office tucked between two aging warehouses. The brass plate on the door read, "Jonas Ward, Attorney at Law." Jonas had once been my mother's closest friend, the kind of man who lingered in our home long after dinner, sipping tea with her in low conversations I was too young to understand. Now he was gray, his hands trembling slightly as he poured coffee into chipped mugs, but his eyes still held the same sharpness I remembered from childhood. When I placed the wooden box on his desk, his breath caught. "She kept her word," he whispered, as though speaking to her ghost. He opened the letter, scanned the contents, and then looked up at me with a mixture of grief and pride. "Nathaniel, your mother prepared for this. She left a second will sealed and notarized, hidden from Magnus. And there's more. Federal investigators had begun looking into your father's finances years ago. Money laundering, offshore accounts. Your mother gathered evidence, but she knew you'd be the one to use it." The words landed like blows and blessings all at once. For years I had thought of myself as invisible, the child who never mattered. But here was proof that my mother had built a shield in silence, waiting for me to pick it up. Jonas leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "The law is on your side, Nathaniel. But the law alone won't win this war. You'll need allies who can expose the truth in a way even your father can't silence." The office door opened then, and a young woman stepped inside. She carried the same intensity as Jonas, but sharper, quicker, like a blade unsheathed. "You called me?" she asked. "This is my daughter Sophia," Jonas said. "She's a journalist, and she's braver than I ever was." Sophia crossed the room, extended her hand to me, and smiled with a kind of fire that made it impossible not to believe her. "Your story deserves to be told. Not as a scandal whispered behind closed doors, but as a truth the world can't ignore." That afternoon, the three of us spread papers across Jonas's desk. Deeds, patents, financial statements, and that haunting photograph of Magnus with another woman. Sophia took notes furiously, her pen racing like it was fueled by rage. Jonas pieced together timelines, legal strategies, and contingency plans. And I, for the first time, felt less like the mistake, and more like the fulcrum on which the family's empire might turn. We weren't just gathering documents. We were gathering momentum, a tide my father could no longer stop. By the time Monday arrived, the storm inside me had settled into something sharper resolve. Jonas had spent the weekend drafting legal briefs, Sophia gathering timelines, and I memorizing every page of my mother's records until her handwriting burned behind my eyes. We walked into the Cross Realty headquarters, not as guests, but as intruders carrying the weight of a truth too long buried. The boardroom gleamed with cold luxury mahogany table walls, lined with oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors, crystal water pitchers already sweating under the lights. The air smelled of triumph. At the head of the table stood Adrian rehearsing his victory. He looked every bit the heir, his Versace jacket, pressed his hand resting lightly on the chair that was about to become his throne. Magnus stood beside him, shoulders squared, the proud architect of this coronation. "Gentlemen," Magnus began, his voice filling the chamber with practiced authority. "Today we secure the future of Cross Realty. My son Adrian will take the helm, ensuring our empire thrives for generations." Applause rippled from the directors, senators, bankers, all those who had come to witness my erasure made official. That's when I opened the door. Silence fell as I entered, Jonas on one side of me, Sophia on the other, and two federal prosecutors close behind. My footsteps echoed against the marble floor, steady, deliberate. Adrian's smile faltered. Magnus's face hardened, but his eyes flickered with something else, fear he couldn't mask fast enough. I placed the wooden box on the table, the same one Evelyn had given me. My voice didn't shake this time. "Before you crown your new king, you might want to review the real owner of this empire." I slid the USB drive across to the prosecutors. One inserted it into the projector, and the screen behind us lit up with scanned documents, patents signed in my mother's nameland, deeds belonging to the Harrow estate contracts Magnus had hidden in the shadows, but never destroyed. "This is nonsense," Adrian barked, slamming his fist against the table. "Fabrications forged to humiliate us." The lead prosecutor shook his head. "Not fabricated. These documents were sealed in our office 10 years ago by your mother, Isabella Harrow Cross. She anticipated this exact day. We've verified every signature, every date. The empire you claim is built on her designs, her inheritance, not your father's." The room shifted. Bankers who had been nodding moments ago now stared at Magnus, their confidence unraveling. Magnus staggered a step back, his hand gripping the chair for balance. She wouldn't do this to me," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. But the truth was projected in front of everyone, undeniable and merciless. My father's empire, his pride, his power, was nothing more than a borrowed crown. And the woman he had silenced, the one he dismissed as gentle and unimportant, had outplayed him from the grave. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the mistake. I was the reckoning. The silence that followed my mother's documents was not victory's roar, but something heavier, resignation. One by one, the board members shifted their gaze from Magnus to me, the son they had dismissed as a mistake. By the time the prosecutors closed their files, the balance of power had already changed hands. Within a week, I held 55% of Cross Realty. My father's empire, his crown jewel, now rested in mine. But power does not erase wounds. It only magnifies them. I moved into the executive office, though it never felt like mine. The walls still carried the scent of my father's cologne, the shelves lined with trophies engraved with Adrian's name. Some nights I sat behind the vast oak desk and felt like an intruder in my own inheritance. That's when I called Jonas. He became my counsel not only in law, but in life. His voice carried the same steadiness my mother's once did, reminding me that strategy required patience, not rage. Beside him was Sophia, fire to his stone. She spearheaded a campaign called Cross Electric Futures, reshaping the company's image overnight. Billboards across Charleston bore the slogan, "Innovation begins again." It was my mother's vision finally given breath. but shadows lingered. Adrian had vanished from the boardroom after our confrontation, his pride burned, but not extinguished. I should have expected what came next. Late one evening, Sophia slid a manila folder across my desk. Inside were photographs Adrian seated with executives from Langford Motors, one of our oldest rivals. Contracts half signed, hinted at an alliance meant to strip me of control. "He's not done fighting," Sophia said quietly. I studied the photographs, my brother's smile tight and rehearsed. He had always been the chosen one, the golden heir. To lose to me, to the brother, labeled a mistake, was a humiliation he could not endure. The war wasn't over. It was just changing fronts. And yet my greatest battle was not with Adrian or Magnus. It was with myself. At night, when the boardroom emptied and the lights dimmed, I found myself haunted by Clara's absence. I could still hear the click of her heels, leaving me the cold certainty in her choice to follow Adrian. She had loved the empire, not the man. And now that empire was mine, but her absence made it feel hollow. Success had come wrapped in solitude. Still, when I walked through the production floor, hearing engineers discuss prototypes for electric vehicles, I felt her presence, the quiet strength of my mother. She had fought in silence, and now it was my turn to speak for her. To build not for applause, but for justice. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the mistake. But power came with a price. Family fractured, love-lost enemies, waiting in the dark. And though I carried the title of majority shareholder, what I carried most was her voice reminding me that the quiet ones, if they endure long enough, can change everything. The weeks after Adrian's betrayal came to light were filled with movement meetings, press briefings, design proposals, but inside I carried a stillness, the kind that comes after surviving a storm. Yet I knew the battle was not over. My father's empire was mine, now reshaped under my mother's name, but her voice still lingered in the silence between decisions. It was Evelyn who reminded me that my journey wasn't complete. She invited me to the Harrow estate one late afternoon. The drive wound through centuries-old oak trees, their branches draped in Spanish moss that swayed like ghosts of the past. The mansion rose from the earth like it had been waiting for me all along. Inside, Evelyn led me to a study lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes, the scent of old paper and cedar thick in the air. On the desk sat another envelope, its edges yellowed but its seal unbroken. My mother's handwriting covered the front. For Nathaniel, when the noise has quieted. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Her words spilled across the page, steady and tender. My son, the mistake was never you. The mistake is believing only one child can inherit love, legacy, or destiny. You and Adrian were never meant to destroy one another. You were meant to stand together, different but equal, carrying both Cross and Harrow into the future. If you can find a way to forgive, to share, then what I built will not just survive, it will endure. The paper blurred as my eyes filled. For years, I had carried her absence like a stone. Now, through ink and memory, she placed the burden down beside me. It wasn't about defeating Adrian. It was about refusing to repeat my father's mistakes. I left the Harrow estate with a new clarity. Back at headquarters, I began restructuring Cross Realty into something my mother would recognize. Jonas handled the legal architecture, Sophia transformed the narrative, and I committed our resources to green technology. Factories once filled with the smoke of yesterday were redesigned to birth electric vehicles, solar grids, and charging stations. The company that once defined my humiliation now bore my mother's quiet genius. And still, every decision carried her final message: find a way back to Adrian. I didn't know if reconciliation was possible, but hope, like grief, has its own persistence. It was Sophia who found the twist I hadn't expected. One evening, while cataloging old documents, she discovered a false bottom in the wooden box. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, a deed to land in Nevada barren desert on the surface, but recently valued in the hundreds of millions for its lithium reserves. My mother had hidden even this from Evelyn, waiting for the right time. I stared at the map etched on the deed, the weight of new possibilities pressing against me. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was another beginning. For the first time, I understood what she meant. The quiet ones don't just endure, they prepare.